Ever get that feeling like you just want to cut through the noise and get right to the good stuff, the knowledge that can really make a difference?
For sure. Absolutely.
Well, we're doing that today. We're taking a deep dive into something that's, well, it's kind of all around us.
Everywhere you look, yeah.
Have you ever considered what makes up the silent majority of the food on your plate?
Interesting question.
We're talking ultra-processed foods, and get this, they make up over 70% of what many people eat in the U.S.
70%. That is a lot.
It really makes you think, doesn't it? Like, what is that actually doing to our health?
Absolutely. Big question.
So that's exactly what we're exploring today. There's this really interesting government study going on right now trying to get some real answers about those health effects.
I'm going to unpack it all.
And we're here to break it all down for you, the key insights, without having to wade through all the technical stuff.
Yeah, cut to the chase.
Think of it like your shortcut to staying informed. And if you find this kind of deep dive helpful, the kind that gives you knowledge that you can actually use, sparks some motivation, maybe even inspires you with fresh ideas, then you should think about subscribing to our YouTube channel, Necessary Cookies.
It's a great channel.
We're not just about the headlines. It's all about thoughtful content that helps you grow and become the best version of yourself.
Exactly. That's what we aim for.
All right, so let's jump right in. We've been looking at a recent report from the Associated Press. It was in the New York Post back in March. It takes a close look at this really intriguing study.
Yeah, some fascinating stuff in there.
And we're going to unpack it all right here. What are they trying to find out about ultra-processed foods? Why should you even care? And what can we learn from what they've discovered so far?
That's the plan.
Sounds good. So first things first, let's get into the details of this study. It's being led by a guy named Kevin Hall over at the National Institutes of Health.
The NIH.
Right, and the big question they're tackling is this. Does eating a diet loaded with ultra-processed foods actually cause people to eat more calories?
Makes sense.
And because of that, gain weight, which could then lead to obesity and all sorts of health problems that come with that? And if so, why? What's the mechanism behind all of this?
How does it actually work?
Exactly. What I find really fascinating about this research is how they're going about it.
Yeah, their methodology is pretty intense.
A lot of nutrition studies rely on people, remembering and reporting what they eat.
Right, which isn't always the most accurate.
But this study is different. They're monitoring people 247 in a controlled environment.
Like in a hospital setting.
Which means they're getting much more accurate data.
Oh yeah, way more reliable.
They even had this 20-year-old college student, Sam Strasada from Florida, who lived in the hospital for a whole month as part of the study.
Wow, a whole month.
He got to play video games and stuff, but all his meals were provided and, of course, very carefully controlled by the researchers. To really study the effects of these ultra-processed foods. He even mentioned one day he had chicken nuggets with chips and ketchup for lunch. Pretty standard, right?
Yeah, sounds pretty familiar.
And you know what? He got paid $5,000 for participating.
Not bad for a month of video games and chicken nuggets.
Not bad at all. It's amazing the commitment these participants had, 28 days under constant observation. And it wasn't just about the food. They were wearing monitors to track their movements. They had regular blood draws.
I read about that, up to 14 vials a week.
And they spent a full 24 hours each week in a metabolic chamber.
That's a special room, right?
Yeah. It lets the researchers measure exactly how many calories their bodies are burning and what kind of fuel they're using.
So they can really see what's happening on a deeper level.
And the whole food aspect is really intriguing. Participants could eat as much or as little as they wanted, but the meals were designed by an NIH dietitian, Sarah Turner, and a whole team.
So very precise.
They were measuring, weighing, slicing, cooking. Everything was so precise.
Wow, must have been a lot of work.
And they had this added challenge of making sure the food was still enjoyable while also fitting the strict needs of the study.
It's tougher than it sounds.
All this research is really timely, especially with what Health Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr. has been talking about. He's made nutrition and preventing chronic diseases a top priority.
Yeah, he's been quite vocal about that.
He's pretty concerned about processed foods, particularly in school lunches.
He wants them gone.
He thinks they're a big part of why kids are having health problems. So the results of this study could have a real impact on public health policies.
Definitely, a lot of potential there.
Which begs the question, what exactly are ultra-processed foods? We hear the term a lot, but what does it actually mean in our everyday lives?
Well, think of things like those sugary cereals, potato chips, frozen pieces, sodas, and ice cream.
The usual suspects.
They're usually loaded with fat, sodium, and sugar.
And cheap to make.
Mass-produced, too. Often they have artificial colors, flavors, and all those chemical additives you wouldn't find in a home kitchen.
And it's hard to ignore the trend, right? As we've eaten more of these ultra-processed foods, the rates of obesity and other diet-related diseases have skyrocketed.
Yeah, hard to miss that correlation.
It really makes you wonder if there's a direct connection there.
It's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
And that's exactly what researchers like Kevin Hall are trying to figure out. You mentioned his 2019 study. That gave us some initial insights. He found that people ate around 500 more calories a day when they were on a diet of mostly ultra-processed foods.
Compared to a diet with the same nutrients but with less processed ingredients.
Right. And this new study is digging even deeper, trying to figure out exactly why these ultra-processed foods might be making us overeat.
Unraveling the mystery.
So what are some of the leading theories? What's making us eat more than we need?
Well, there's two big ones. One is the idea of irresistible combinations.
Okay.
So the thinking is that the mix of high fat, sugar, sodium, and carbs in these foods really triggers something in our brains. Makes us want to eat more and more.
So it's like a perfect storm of deliciousness.
Pretty much. And the other big theory is about calorie density. Ultra-processed foods often have a ton of calories packed into a really small amount of food.
So you eat more before you even realize you're full.
Yeah, that's the idea.
Makes sense. So have there been any early findings from this new study? Anything that might shed some light on these theories?
Well, actually, Hall presented some preliminary results at a conference back in November. The first 18 participants who ate a diet that was, how do they put it, hyperpalatable, very energy dense, which means mostly ultra-processed foods. They ate around 1,000 more calories each day compared to the group eating minimally processed foods. And they gained weight too.
1,000 extra calories a day?
That's a lot. Really highlights the potential impact.
But there's a nuance here that's really important. When the diet was still mostly ultra-processed, over 80% of calories, but they tweaked it to be less hyperpalatable and energy dense, people ate less.
Yeah, less appealing, less overeating.
So it might not just be about the fact that a food is processed, but about how it's processed that makes the difference.
How tempting it is, how many calories it packs per bite. But we need to remember, these are just preliminary findings. They need to finish the study, analyze everything, and get their work peer-reviewed before we could say anything for sure.
Yeah, science takes time. And it seems like there's been some debate about this focus on ultra-processed foods. Some scientists aren't totally on board.
Right, not everyone's convinced. Dr. David Ledwig, for example, has been pretty critical.
I've heard of him.
He called the 2019 study fundamentally flawed because it was so short, only about a month.
Makes sense.
He argues that you might see some changes in eating habits in the short term, but those effects often fade over time.
So a longer study would give a more accurate picture.
Exactly. He thinks focusing on processing might be distracting from the real issue, which he believes is highly processed carbs.
So he's more concerned about the type of food rather than just whether it's processed or not.
Precisely. He wants to see longer studies, at least 2 months, with breaks in between to let the body reset.
And what do other experts think?
Marion Nestle, a well-respected figure in nutrition, agrees that longer studies are needed. But she also acknowledges the challenges. Getting the funding for these large-scale long-term studies is always a hurdle.
Yeah, research costs money.
It does. And the article points out that the NIH only allocates about 5% of its budget to nutrition research. That's about $2 billion a year.
Which isn't actually that much, considering how important food is to our health.
Exactly. And the specialized metabolic units, the ones they're using in this study, have actually been downsized, which limits how many people they can study at once.
Slows things down.
Definitely. The article even mentioned Gerald Mandy's proposal for a new 50-bed facility for government nutrition scientists.
I read about that.
That would be a huge step forward. They could conduct more in-depth studies. Mandy said it best. If we really want to improve public health and tackle these chronic diseases, we need solid scientific evidence to show us the way.
Totally agree. And it was interesting to hear what the college student who participated, Sam Strasada, had to say about all this.
Oh, yeah. What was his take?
He said he thinks most people already kind of know that it's best to avoid heavily processed foods.
It's common sense, in a way.
Right. But he thinks it's really important to have strong scientific evidence to back that up, for the general public to really get it.
It's one thing to have a gut feeling, but solid data can really change people's minds.
Exactly. Okay, so let's sum all this up for our listeners. What are the key takeaways from our deep dive today?
Well, first off, This study at the NIH, led by Kevin Hall, is using some very precise methods to figure out how ultra-processed foods affect what we eat and our weight.
Super thorough research.
Yeah, they're not messing around. Second, early findings suggest that it's the tastiness and calorie density of these foods that might be the big drivers of overeating and weight gain.
Those irresistible combinations.
Exactly. But we can't forget, these are still preliminary findings. We need to wait for the full results.
Patience is key.
And third, there's still debate about how to best study this, how long the study should be, and which parts of processed foods are the most harmful.
Science is a process.
Always evolving.
It's about understanding the nuances, right? And hopefully, even at this early stage, this knowledge can help you make smarter choices about what you eat.
Without getting lost in all the complicated science.
We're all about empowering you with knowledge.
Absolutely. Knowledge is power.
And speaking of knowledge, here's something to think about. If the way food interacts with our bodies is so complex, what other everyday things in our lives might be affecting our health in ways we haven't even considered?
Interesting question. Makes you think.
It's a good reminder to always be curious and question everything.
Question everything. Love it.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. If you're looking for more thought-provoking content, the kind that gives you valuable knowledge, sparks inspiration, and offers fresh perspectives, you should definitely subscribe to our YouTube channel, Necessary Cookies. We're all about helping you grow, succeed, and become the best version of yourself.
It's a great community. Join us.
We're not just telling stories here, we're diving deep into the topics that matter.
The stuff that can really change your life.
We'll see you next time.
See you then.